They found the house at 2:13 a.m., its windows breathing out a faint red glow, like the embers of a dying heart. The smoke rising from the chimney didn't drift upward. It curled downward, clinging to the roof like fingers refusing to let go. The 40 Klansmen who surrounded the tiny wooden cabin believed they were minutes away from reclaiming their authority. What they did not know, not yet, was that they were steps away from a graveyard disguised as a home. A house that had belonged to a woman the Confederate Army never officially acknowledged. A rumor, dismissed, erased, but whispered decades later, that a single runaway slave had slaughtered an entire battalion before disappearing into the forests of South Carolina. Her name had been Adeline Hope. The Klansmen were not here by accident. They had been sent by the surviving sons and grandsons of those soldiers who never returned home from Black Hollow Ridge. They believed Adeline was dead. They needed her to be dead. But the lantern on her porch flickered, a weak flame barely alive. And then, without wind, without touch, without motion, the flame straightened itself, glowed brighter, as if recognizing guests. And inside, behind the wooden walls soaked with secrets, something whispered, "You finally came." The men didn't know that the land they stood on had once been drenched in blood from both armies. A terrain that fed not on rain, but on grief, vengeance, and the bones beneath. They approached cautiously, boots crunching through frost-bitten grass. The house looked older than time. Cedar wood blackened as though it had been burned but never surrendered. The door hung crooked, but not collapsed. The windows cracked, but not broken. Everything about the home looked wounded, but still alive. The leader of the group, a man who called himself Grand Marshal Ellison Crow, raised his rifle and signaled silence. Crow was a descendant of Colonel Alastair Crow, one of the 200 Confederates who vanished near this house in 1863. The disappearance had never been reported publicly. Mothers were told their sons died honorably in battle. Widows were told their husbands never suffered. But diaries, private diaries, told another story. They spoke of soldiers going mad, of mutilated bodies found hanging from trees without ropes, of faces frozen in screams so wide their jaws snapped. Adeline Hope was blamed, but never arrested, never questioned, never found. She simply vanished. Or so they believed. Ellison Crow had spent 40 years researching her, obsessing over a ghost his family insisted wasn't real. Tonight, he planned to verify the legend. One of the men shouted from the rear, "Marshal, we only count 38 here." Crow's eyes narrowed. They arrived with 40. Someone, or something, was already missing. A cold wind slid across the field, but the trees didn't move. Shadows shifted without light. And from inside the house, a board creaked, slowly, as if someone tiptoed right behind the walls. The house was not abandoned. It was waiting. The story of Adeline Hope began long before that night. In 1863, the Confederate Army controlled most of the region, forests swarming with soldiers, patrols sweeping plantations for runaway slaves. Among them was Adeline, 24 years old, resourceful, silent, and strong in ways that defied logic. 2 months after she escaped Crow Plantation, scouts returned with rumors, terrifying ones, that Adeline had been seen along Black Hollow Ridge, living alone, building something beneath the ground. Soldiers laughed at the tales, called them superstition. But when Colonel Crow sent 50 armed men to capture her, none returned. The second mission, 80 men, fared worse. Their bodies were discovered without heads, arranged in a perfect circle, like offerings placed for a god no one ever prayed to. The third and final battalion, 70 troops, vanished. Not a footprint, not a uniform button, not a bone. 200 soldiers lost in a forest controlled by a woman who had no army, no resources, no family. How? The Confederacy burned the records. Union forces dismissed it as ghost stories. Preachers blamed demons. Plantation owners blamed God for punishing them through her. But those who survived, rare survivors, spoke of tunnels beneath the soil, of traps no engineer could design, of war tactics she should never have known. Some claimed she didn't kill out of fear, but precision. Some whispered she was guided, not by men, but by something buried deeper than history, something forgotten, something hungry. Back in the present, Ellison Crow adjusted his torch and stared at the house with eyes hollowed by decades of obsession. His life had been shaped by a war he never fought. His grandfather, father, and brother had all died chasing the truth about Adeline Hope. Not in battle, not in sickness, but strange, inexplicable deaths. His grandfather's bones were found near the ridge, jaw ripped off. His father's body appeared sitting upright in a pew, eyes missing. His brother vanished completely. Only his clothes found nailed to a tree trunk, perfectly unfolded. For the Crow family, the legend wasn't entertainment. It was inheritance. Ellison wasn't here for revenge, though vengeance burned inside his chest like coal. He wasn't here for justice, because justice had long lost its meaning. He was here for completion, to put an ending where history had left ellipses. The men around him murmured anxiously. Rifles were clutched too tight, knuckles blanched white. Fear clung to their breath, visible in the cold night air as clouds of dread. Ellison stepped forward, not toward the door, but toward the earth. He kneeled, brushing aside dead leaves, revealing something small, but unmistakable. A brass Confederate button. Its engraving, not weathered, but polished, as if someone cleaned it recently. His blood ran cold. Something wasn't just alive in that house. Something was active. The wind didn't howl, but breathed. And the trees weren't growing, but listening. Who was Adeline Hope before the world tried to silence her? Born in 1839 on Crow Plantation, Adeline grew up surrounded by cruelty, chains, and forced labor. But unlike others, she never bowed. She observed everything. How overseers moved, how traps operated, how rifles were cleaned. She listened to conversations she wasn't meant to hear, battle strategies, terrain discussions, supply routes. At night, she drew maps in the dirt with her finger, plans no one saw. She studied ravines, water currents, and abandoned mines. She memorized everything. When she escaped, she left no trail, not a broken twig, not a footprint. What no one realized was that Adeline did not escape randomly. She had been preparing for years. And years. The Confederates believed they owned the land. Adeline had learned it. She had turned nature itself into architecture, designed death into the geography. And the day she built the first trap, she was no longer a runaway slave. She became the architect of her own vengeance. The forests whispered her name like prayer. The soil accepted her like blood. Survivors said she didn't run because she wasn't prey. She waited because she was the storm. Present day, the 39 remaining men tightened the circle around the cabin. A low whistle cracked through the night, sharp, unnatural, metallic. Then, a scream ripped through the darkness. Not from the house. From behind them. They spun, flashlights shaking. A man dangled upside down 10 feet in the air, ensnared by a rope that hadn't been there seconds before. His mouth stretched in a silent scream. He tried to shout, but his voice gagged as if swallowed by the night itself. Crow ordered 2 men to cut him down, but the rope was woven from something coarse and unfamiliar, like vines braided with sinew. The moment their knife touched it, the rope tightened, crushing his ribs. His spine snapped. Silence. The man's body dropped in front of them, limbs bent backward like an insect crushed under a boot. Panic erupted. Weapons drawn. Shouts fired. Ellison Crow didn't flinch, not an inch. He simply whispered, "She knows we're here." The house doors creaked, not opening, but exhaling. A smell drifted out, earthy, metallic, ancient, like soil soaked in old blood and left to rot. The men had not invaded neutral land. They were trespassing in a territory designed to punish. Adeline's territory. Ellison reached into his coat and pulled out a weathered leather journal, pages brittle, ink fading. This diary wasn't his. It belonged to a Union soldier who'd gone rogue after the war, devoting his life to tracking Adeline. The soldier's final entry read, "She is not killing us out of hatred. Not anymore. She is preserving something, guarding something. We are not prey. We are trespassers in a covenant older than this country." Another page showed a sketch, shaky lines. A cabin above ground. Tunnels beneath. Tunnels leading everywhere. Crow believed these tunnels still existed. He believed she used them to disappear. But the truth, the dark, revolting truth, was that no one ever saw Adeline Hope run. They only saw her appear, just before they died. The Klansmen believed they were hunters, but in every forgotten story, erased chapter, and buried diary, the soldiers described Adeline with one word: predator. Without warning, the cabin door drifted ajar. Not forced, not pushed, inviting. A warm light glowed from within, amber and soft, like a childhood memory wrapped inside trauma. The walls flickered with the dull dance of surviving fire. Ellison stepped forward. Inside the house, the furniture remained untouched, preserved like a shrine. A wooden rocking chair sat in the corner, motionless at first, then creaked, rocking back and forth though no wind touched it. But what struck them most was the table, laid perfectly, like a dinner invitation. 40 plates, 40 cups, 40 sets of utensils, everything coated in dust, except for one plate at the head of the table. Its silverware gleamed. Fresh, clean, waiting. Ellison's eyes widened. He counted the plates again. Not 40, not 39, 41. The extra plate sat directly across from the head position. Not for Adeline, for someone or something else. One of the men uncovered a sculpture in the corner, crudely shaped, carved from animal bone. A symbol etched onto its surface, a circle with a vertical slit down the center, resembling an unblinking eye or a birth wound. Crow recognized it instantly. That same symbol was carved into the chest of his grandfather's corpse. The man holding it dropped it instantly, but the sculpture didn't fall. It hovered, midair, supported by nothing visible. Then, it rotated slowly toward him. The house groaned, its floorboards expanding like lungs filling with air. The symbol wasn't decorative. It was a marker, a warning, a promise. This was not the home of a woman. It was the shrine of a covenant. And they were not invaders. They were offerings. Back to the past, a soldier's written testimony. When we marched through the ridge, the land seemed to breathe. Vines moved without wind. Branches snapped though no one stepped on them. The sound wasn't nature, it was language. The Confederates chased Adeline like a fox. Adeline hunted them like a farmer clearing pests. The 1st Battalion found traps so complex that military engineers couldn't replicate them. Pits disguised with moss, spring-loaded spears crafted from sharpened bone, nets woven from roots that tightened with struggle. But the traps weren't what terrified survivors. It was her calm. She never attacked in rage. She dismantled them silently, methodically, leaving one alive. To tell the story. To spread fear. Confederate reinforcements didn't march toward battle. They marched into ritual. Because Adeline wasn't defending herself. She was feeding the land. Present day, the floor in the cabin vibrated. Something moved beneath them, slow, heavy, serpentine. The men retreated toward the walls, but quickly realized the wood trembled too. Ellison signaled everyone outside. They ran, but the earth rippled as if stretched by something underneath, like veins inflating. The ground cracked open. A tunnel mouth yawned wide, lined not with dirt, but with hardened roots that formed walls like rib cages. Crow's breath hitched. The tunnels were not human-made. They were grown. The journal had been right. She wasn't alone. She never had been. Rumors told that Adeline Hope once spoke of voices coming from beneath the soil. Voices that taught. Voices that commanded. Voices that suffered with her. The forest was not a witness to her trauma. It was forged by it. When Confederates whipped her, the trees shook. When chains cut her, roots moved. When others screamed, the land absorbed the sound. By the time she escaped, the forest was no longer neutral ground. It was an extension of her. She fed it vengeance. It gave her power. Whether the force was spiritual, eldritch, ancestral, or a curse forged through collective agony, no one knew. But the covenant was sealed. Her blood was an offering. The land accepted. In present day, they counted again. 37. Another gone. No scream. No sound. Crow felt it now, not fear, but recognition. This was not retaliation. This was reclamation. Every descendant of the soldiers who vanished bore the same fate. Not out of cruelty, but out of contract. The land was owed blood, and the debt was generational. One man broke, bolting toward the woods. He didn't make it far. The ground swallowed him. Straight down. Without struggle. Without scream. As though he never existed. Crow descended. He needed truth more than he needed breath. The tunnel walls pulsed softly, like arteries pumping sleep. The air was thick, humid, carrying the faint rhythm of a heartbeat. At the end of the tunnel, he saw carvings on the root-like walls, stories etched not with tools, but fingernails. Scenes of enslavement. Scenes of escape. Scenes of slaughter. Scenes of worship. And finally, scenes of men in white hoods, hanging upside down, burning. Crow touched the carvings. They were warm, alive, watching. The tunnel expanded into a a cathedral sculpted by nature and fury. At its center stood an altar of intertwined roots and bone fragments. Upon it lay a book, not bound by leather, but by something disturbingly similar to skin. Crow approached. The book opened itself. Inside were names. Hundreds. Dates of death. Cause. Retribution. Near the end, he found his own surname. Crow, followed by a blank line. Waiting. He realized the covenant wasn't revenge. It was remembrance. The dead demanded acknowledgement, not erasure. The roots behind him untangled, forming a silhouette of a woman. Not ghostly, not transparent. A figure woven of roots, soil, bone, and the memories of every scream buried beneath. Her voice did not echo. It bloomed. Names that are erased must be replanted. Crow tried to speak, but guilt sealed his throat. Adeline did not emerge as a victim. She materialized as an archivist of agony, a guardian of lost names, a record of pain. She did not ask forgiveness. She did not offer mercy. She simply existed, unyielding, like a monument built from grief. Adeline spoke, not in rage, but in truth. She did not kill 200 men. She harvested them. Every body taken. Fed the land. Every name forgotten. Grew roots. Every scream ignored. Became a hymn. Her wrath wasn't violence. It was balance. The Confederates worshipped conquest. Adeline worshipped consequence. Her covenant wasn't with darkness. It was with memory. If history refused to write their stories, the earth would. Ellison fell to his knees, not from fear, but inevitability. His family ran plantations. His bloodline profited. His father denied history. His grandfather justified it. His brother mocked it. Ellison wasn't innocent, but he was aware. And awareness is where hauntings begin. Adeline reached forward, not touching, but surrounding. Roots circled his arms, not restraining, but claiming. Every bloodline must carry its memory. Ellison vanished, not violently, but absorbed. The land had taken another historian, or birthed one. The remaining men fled. They didn't make it far. The forest was no longer trees, it was architecture. Every branch a trap, every shadow a snare. In the morning, the field was empty. No footprints, no bodies. Only 41 plates resting on the cabin table. 41 cups, 41 utensils. A complete set. At last. Today, locals say Black Hollow Ridge is cursed. Hunters avoid it. Birds refuse to fly over it. Tourists wander near it. None return. No historical marker stands. No textbook mentions it. No preacher speaks of it. But sometimes, on cold nights, the forest emits faint sounds. Singing. Soft, steady. Like names recited in endless hymns. Some call it haunting. Some call it judgment. But the land knows. It is remembering. Because as long as there are stories buried rather than told, as long as truths are erased rather than acknowledged, the earth will continue its work. Silent. Patient. Relentless. Adeline Hope did not disappear. She became history's correction. And the correction isn't done.